All right, I think we will get started here. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the Minneapolis Ward 11 Virtual Candidate Forum, hosted by Make Homes Happen. We're so glad to have you all here with us this evening. My name is Chad Dittman. I'm the Land Development Director at Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, a Make Homes Happen member. I'll be the MC and moderator this evening. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We are using Zoom webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see and hear you. We are recording this webinar and we will share it on the Make Homes Happen Facebook page by the end of the month. Audience members, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions you have for the candidates. They'll be able to answer your questions directly in a bit. And finally, for our candidates who would like to do so, I invite you at this time to share your website, contact page, or email address in the chat in case voters want to follow up with any questions. And I think actually our tech guru, Tabitha, has all that information and it's going to post that shortly. All right, as you all know, we have an important election coming up on November 2nd in less than 2 months. All 13 Minneapolis City Council members and the Minneapolis mayor are up for election this year, as well as all park board members and 2 Board of Estimate and Taxation members. To see exactly who will be on your ballot, visit the Secretary of State's website. For information about when, where, and how to vote, visit www.vote.minneapolismn.gov. Tabitha, our tech guru tonight, will share these links in the chat for you. Additionally, Minneapolis has ranked choice voting elections. This November, you will have the power to rank your first, second, and third choice candidates on your ballot. If your first choice does not continue in the instant runoff, your vote goes to your second choice. And if your second choice does not continue, your vote goes to your third choice. You should rank as many candidates as you prefer, up to 3. When you listen to the candidates tonight, consider not just your first choice, but also your second and third, because those will be valid votes. Before we hear from candidates, let me tell you a little bit about Make Homes Happen. We're a coalition of community-based groups and organizations that advocate for affordable housing development, preservation, and tenant rights in Minneapolis. In 2017, we helped successfully push for a $40 million investment to the Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Yet even then, the housing needs of our community far outweigh the dollars spent. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated what was already a housing crisis. And we know housing is a critical issue for our city. City leaders have significant influence on the policies, programs, and funding choices that impact our community. And that's why Make Homes Happen is hosting this forum tonight. In order to ensure the fairness of our election series, Make Homes Happen used a uniform process in communicating with candidates. We approached each candidate and invited them to participate in a Zoom interview about housing. The interview included 3 questions, and candidates had 2 minutes to respond to each question. We recorded the candidates' answers, and we'll play them back for you now as opening statements for this event. Note that we did not edit the content of candidate responses, but we did cut off each answer at 2 minutes. Anything that was said after 2 minutes will not be shared here today. This was done to ensure standardization across the interviews we conducted. Finally, candidates who did not participate in the Zoom interview will each have 2 minutes to present an opening statement live today. So let's get ready to hear from our candidates. Tabitha will play the recorded Zoom interviews for us, and we'll start with Kurt Anderson. Tabitha, looks like we don't have sound. Is anyone else hearing?
I don't hear anything.
No, okay.
Apologies, everyone. I'll just get that taken care of. I need to be off mute myself.
We're still not getting anything. Apologies, folks, but we'll get this figured out shortly.
Just coming off camera to apologize for the disconnect. So we will figure this out. Just bear with us.
No, I can't, Tabitha.
Again, apologies, everyone. We're gonna move toward opening statements live, and then I'm gonna still be working in the background to figure out if we can get the videos to play. So we're gonna offer each of our candidates an opportunity to make 2-minute opening statements about how housing relates to their priorities within the campaign, and hopefully we will be able to get this figured out shortly. Thank you for your patience.
All right, so let's start with Kurt, if you're available. Hopefully we didn't lose.
Need to unmute and get back online here.
There we go.
I did pull up my notes from that interview, and I'm more than happy to do it this way too.
All right.
So let me just go to that, and you can start the clock on me.
All right, it's going now.
All right, thank you much. I regard the city's direction here as basically 1/3 right, 2/3 wrong. First of all, I very much endorse the idea of triplexes, shared housing units, and anything that will make home ownership affordable. If owning owning a triplex or owning a duplex helps you buy houses, that's great. My theme is you don't want to get to be this age and still have a rent or mortgage payment. So whatever gets you out of that is helpful. I am concerned about. By the way, I think a 30-year mortgage is a more substantial commitment. The 2/3 wrong is that if the greater density is not tied to home ownership, first of all, it's going to tend to upzoning equals up pricing, so it's going to be a problem. And I think if we we do need to tie that to home ownership. I'm looking at my nose right now, not at the clock. So if you stop me, that's fair enough. In terms of where the, by the way, are you just on the first question, or are we going through all of them right now?
Leave it to you.
Okay, in general, where that housing should occur is of course the next question. Minneapolis right now has 1.35 times the population density of St. Paul. It has more than 3 times the population density of the metro. I think we need to not confine ourselves to the city limits when we're talking about housing affordability. Also, I want to take the Minneapolis Realtors Association up on their commitment to undo the effects of historical racial covenants. I think the city council and that's home ownership. Want to fix that inequity in home ownership. Practical skills. I'm a bankruptcy lawyer. I've been helping people keep their houses, and farmers keep their farms for decades. Want to scrutinize, all housing plans proposals to make sure that they are financially feasible. Financial feasibility is a real key in this whole discussion. Sometimes gets overlooked. I'm not looking at the clock, but I think I'm going to stop right now.
And I'm going to stop you there, Kurt. That was 2 minutes. I'm going to turn my timer off here. All right, so we will move on. Again, 2 minutes for an opening statement. Dillon, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to Make Homes Happen and all of the groups and organizations involved in that. I will self-admit that I did not have the ability to answer the question, so I'm going to do just kind of an introduction and talk about how housing relates and why it's important to me. So I was born and raised in a rural mining community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I was raised by my single mother of 5 and my grandparents. In my start to Minneapolis, after I came out as openly gay to my family, I moved to Minneapolis. And for the last 15 years, the majority of the last 15 years, I've called Minneapolis home. But my start in Minneapolis was very rocky. When I first came here, I did not have housing. And so I spent the first 2 months living out of my vehicle off of Lake Street. And then I transitioned to renting 2 coworkers' couch for about 6 months before I finally had saved up enough money to pay the first couple of months rent at an apartment that I ended up getting with a roommate. So housing has a deep-rooted position in my life. For the majority of my time in Minneapolis, I have been a renter. And so I believe housing is a human right, and we have to work to protect that right. Renters are a big piece of it, but I also believe that we need to create a multitude of affordable housing options and pathways to home ownership instead of just constantly focusing on creating apartment living. I believe in a multitude of options. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dillon. Appreciate it. Next up, well, just a quick note here. We did get a recording from Emily Koski. She's not able to attend tonight, so we would have played that. Hopefully we can shortly. So next we'll move on to Albert Ross.
Awesome. Hey, thank you guys for having me here tonight. Thank all you folks at home that took time out of your day to see what we got to say and see how we can win you guys over to represent you here in Ward 11. I'll just start off with giving you guys a quick bio about me so you can know a little bit about me. Basically, I have served in leadership positions throughout my entire life. Born and raised in Greenville, Mississippi, from descendants of slaves. I moved to Minnesota almost 25 years ago, and I met my wife here in Minnesota about 15 years ago, and we got 5 kids together. I got 4 girls, ages 2, ages 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, 11 years, and a son who's 14 years old. And basically, I've been in Minneapolis, like I say, for over 25 years here. And I am running to represent Ward 11 because I am just not happy with what's going on in my community. I'm just not happy with what's going on in my community. I'll go over a few things here. This city is in a crisis. Riots can break out at the drop of a dime. Unemployment is at an all-time high throughout the city. Half the city is on the verge of eviction. Half the landlords in the city is not getting the agreed upon rent from their tenants. The city council members wants to ban the police department in the midst of rising crime. And again, crime is at an all-time high. This city is in a crisis and it needs someone to step up. It needs real leadership to step up and fix the crisis that this city is in. That's why I'm running to represent Ward 11. And as far as the housing, I think housing, and here in Minnesota with so much to offer, we have one of the hugest disparity.
All right, sorry, Albert, I do have to cut you off. I'll try not to let the power get to my head here, guys. But man, if only CNN and the like would do this to the national candidates, right? All right, we will go next to Jeremy Schroeder. Jeremy?
Thanks, Jed. Hey, everybody. My name is Jeremy Schroeder. I'm the city council member for Ward 11, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. So some of my background, I've worked in the nonprofit sector, including working on affordable housing for almost 20 years before becoming elected. I did this work as an attorney, as a city, as a executive director of multiple nonprofits, and now as a city council member. The question was, is the city headed in the right direction? And I do believe it is. But I would also say that's in part from my work with advocates to bring the city to be more focused on making sure everyone gets a home. That entails some of my work to change the shelter laws when last year we saw just such an increase in unsheltered homelessness. It takes long-term thinking, such as working on my inclusionary zoning ordinance, but it also takes future thinking, like how are we going to invest in homes, curating a home for everybody? Because one thing about affordable housing, as difficult as it is, we really honestly know the solution. It's just going to take a lot more money. So how do we dedicate the resources to doing that and to dedicating to making sure that more housing is available for everybody?
All right, thank you, Jeremy. So those are our off-the-cuff opening statements. Again, apologize for the technical difficulties here. I think we can now turn to the next phase of our event, which will be hearing candidate responses to audience questions. So if you're joining us today in the audience, please use the Q&A feature to ask any housing related questions you have for the candidates. Make Homes Happen has prepared a few questions to get us started. And so I don't see any questions in the Q&A yet. So we'll probably start there. To be fair, we'll rotate which candidate starts first and cycle through in alphabetical order as we've been doing. Candidates, you'll each have 2 minutes to respond. And like you just experienced, I will be timing you and we'll meet you at 2 minutes. So we'll start our first question here with Dillon. The question is, can you describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market? And again, if you need me to repeat the question, I can do that for you once.
Yeah, thank you, Chad. So I think, as I kind of talked about in my opening statement, making investments in a multitude of options for affordable housing, I think are key, because apartments just don't work for everyone. It's everything from, projects like the Avivo Village are good projects, but we do need to look at a longer term solution. When we look at just developing affordable apartments, we're leaving individuals out of the fold, multi-generational families, some of our aging community, some of our disabled community, and others, we're leaving them out of the fold. And so I think it's incredibly important that we continue to make investments as a city in not only the production of affordable housing in a balanced way, but also preserving those options, right? Because 5 and 10 years from now, and I'm a future forward thinker, and decisions that we make today are going to have lasting impacts on individuals in our city in 5 years and 10 years. And so we really need to set our city up for growth, and the growth that we're already experiencing. But we need to preserve the affordable housing units and options that we currently have, and then invest in creating a multitude of new ways. And from my perspective, I think that that's the way forward.
All right, thank you, Dillon. Next up will be Albert. Again, the question is, describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
Thank you for your question. I'll start off where I got cut off at before. I feel that the racial disparity gap that currently exists between whites and people of color in our city is one of the worst in our nation. If I'm elected to represent Ward 11, I will enact policies that will improve that racial disparity gap so that all Minneapolis residents get the same opportunity for pursuit of happiness. And second, I'll go over where I was going to go at then. I feel that there should be better protections for renters when it comes to rent control, and also better protections for property owners as well. I feel that we need to strengthen our current housing laws to prohibit discrimination against potential tenants with a history in housing court. I feel that we need to fund more programs to prevent housing loss. We need to do a better job at supporting elder renters and tenants with rent protections and access to legal aid. And we must also do a better job at assisting seniors who wish to downsize. We must expand tools like financial coaching and first-time home buyer programs. We must work with local banks to offer better down payment assistance programs for minorities and people of color. We must support the work of companies like Community Land Trust to put more land into the hands of the community for community-led, for resident-led planning. And I'll stop it at that before you cut me off. I could go on and on and on and on, but I'll stop it at that.
Okay. All right, I will reset the timer and turn it over to Jeremy. Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I'm good, Chad.
Okay.
Thanks. So I would say, preserving NOAA housing. I first want to say, like, I'm not a fan of the term NOAA. Like, there's nothing natural about the housing. Like, it's usually in a less desirable place. It usually doesn't have the same amenities as newer. But it's really important to preserve it because it is much more affordable than any new development. It's a way to make sure that tenants have options without relying on subsidies. And so I know the question just asked about one, but I think there's three important things to really think about for NOAA properties. Is just the building upkeep themselves, the landlords that are in the business, as well as the tenants. And for each one of those, I would say, the city has a NOAA preservation fund, working on how we can work kind of with our partners to preserve current affordable housing. For landlords, we've worked on with the state 4D program, which gives affordable housing landlords a lower tax rate that allows them to keep in business. We also added on sustainability options so we can hopefully get them to be a little more green as well. And then finally, I'm one of the authors of the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which is coming up, and which would give tenants the opportunity to purchase the home that they've been living in. It's another way to make housing options open for folks that are currently renting, and also combat some of the disparities we've seen. We lost a lot of home ownership on the north side when the housing prices crashed, as well as the tornado, when that flipped over into rental. We need to find a way, like the TOPA program, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase program, to get that back into home ownership.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. And I may have said finally before, but that was an error. Time for Kurt to answer the question. And again, most effective measures the city could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market. Kurt?
A couple of, one preliminary. Whenever I see NOAH, I always want to put alongside it NOCR, naturally occurring citizen responsibility. I think I have a great deal of confidence in Minneapolis residents. I think for the most part, they're signed on. If they understand what the challenge is, they'll rise to it. And also, Mr. Schroeder and I may sharply disagree on some issues, but I am 100% with him on tenant options to purchase. I think that is a great initiative. I'm very strong on the idea of promoting home ownership, and I thoroughly endorse that concept. And in that regard, I also want to talk about subsidized home ownership. If we can subsidize people to rent naturally occurring tenant properties, we can also subsidize them to purchase, particularly if they fall in the class of people whose grandparents were excluded by racially restrictive covenants, by redlining and similar issues. I feel like, and also anything that encourages home ownership. If a naturally occurring house, as Mr. Schroeder pointed out, in a less desirable neighborhood, is capable of being occupied by two unrelated family units, go for it. As long as, in my view, one of them is the owner. If there's a problem anywhere on the block, I don't think you have to call out to Wall Street or some suburb to get that problem fixed. And I've seen that happen on my block. So I would strongly endorse measures that support home ownership. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Kurt. So in my behind the scenes communication with Tabitha here, it looks like she's hopeful that we can get the videos going. So we're gonna give that an attempt, and then we will return to Q&A, and we do have an audience question lined up here. But let's see if we can get those videos going.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Can I start now? Okay, there you go. The city's direction is 1/3 right and 2/3 wrong. First of all, the commitment of residents to their neighborhoods is at least as important as affordability itself. But there's a way to promote both goals at the same time, and that's by encouraging home ownership. The 1/3 right part of it then includes the duplexes, the triplexes, the multifamily occupancy, all good ideas if they are tied to home ownership. In other words, somebody in those units should own the place. Somebody ought to be accruing equity besides an investor outside of Minneapolis. The owner occupancy protects a homeowner against future increases in rents and market values. It also commits the owner to a long-term well-being for the neighborhood, nothing like a 30-year mortgage to express commitment. But then allowing renters to rent out portions of their homesteaded buildings will help make ownership affordable and possible. But if there, on the other hand, if there is a difficulty with the property, it should not require a call to a distant landlord. It ought to require a conversation with somebody that you've gotten to know in the neighborhood. But now let me go to the 2/3 wrong piece of it. And because it is a rather big piece, first of all, I could show you the study if I had the time. I don't right now, but the only careful study I've seen of this indicates that upzoning equals up pricing. So if there's going to be so-called upzoning, which means basically permission to build more multi-family dwelling units, tearing down old units, the prices are going to increase. So the intended effect, which is affordable housing, is not going to be accomplished through an attempt at upzoning.
Time. Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Thank you very much. Yes, big time. The affordable housing issue is not limited by the Minneapolis city limits. What we're overlooking is that affordable housing problems extend beyond and throughout the whole metro area. Minneapolis already has more than 1.3 times the population density of St. Paul, and more than 3 times the population density of the entire metro area. We need to make it clear to our neighbors that we do not intend to make a further disproportionate effort to solve the problem, although we will continue to contribute to its solution. The other thing I want to add, because this has been pitched a lot as a racial equity issue, but it's a real head scratcher as to how it's going to promote racial equity. I want to point out that the Minneapolis Association of Realtors has expressed a commitment to integrated housing to undo the effects of historical exclusionary covenants. And I think the city has to get with them and with all other interested players, buyers and sellers, and specifically target people to move into neighborhoods and integrate those neighborhoods, particularly if their ancestors were excluded by Minneapolis covenants. The other thing that's interesting and that I'm open to are proposals for rent control and a tenant option to purchase, which I think is a very interesting idea. I want those things to be thoroughly vetted, though. In other words, I want to make sure that we've looked at all of the actual and hypothetical scenarios that could arise and make sure that the consequences are intended and that we're not haunted by consequences that we don't intend. Thank you.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
Well, of course, first of all, I bought a house in Minneapolis at a time that prices seemed outrageous. They've since gone times 4. Previous 30 years, they've gone times 7. But I want to go to something very specific, which is that I have a long background in bankruptcy law, including a lot of financial projecting for distressed consumers, for small businesses, and a lot of them for farmers. I want to scrutinize all of the housing plans and proposals, including my own, for financial feasibility. I want to make sure we're talking realistic scenarios and not pie in the sky. I would like to commit the city and ourselves, our citizens, to a realistic set of goals that actually can be achieved. Thank you again.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Emily Koski. I want to thank you for your time and for having me here this afternoon. I appreciate it. Yes, I do believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies. However, I'm not conceding that there isn't more that can be done and more that needs to be done when it comes to affordable housing. Too many people are cost burdened, too many people are experiencing homelessness, and there needs to be more opportunities for affordable housing as well as affordable home ownership. These are things that I will prioritize as a city council member. I support the significant investments that the mayor has included in his budgets, especially directing it towards deeply affordable housing with 30% AMI or below, and towards collaborative work with the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. I also support the diversification of our housing sector to meet the needs of Minneapolis's current and future residents, meaning variation in size, type, affordability, and location of housing. But overall, I believe our approach to creating affordable housing in Minneapolis needs to be multifaceted and holistic. I believe that our approach needs to focus not only on creating opportunities for future residents of Minneapolis, but also preserving opportunities for current residents of Minneapolis. I believe that we can't just build our way out of the affordable housing crisis. Yes, we need to build more housing and housing of every type, but more housing supply doesn't inherently guarantee affordability, especially for our most vulnerable residents. We need to make sure that the people we are serving remain the most important part of all policy discussion regarding affordable housing. Thank you.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table
Thank you for the second question. I think it's safe to say that the city of Minneapolis has some of the most forward-leaning housing policies in the country. That being said, I think there's always room for a conversation about what other policies and tools can be brought to the table. A lot of the policies on the table so far focus on creating density and building new affordable housing. But I believe we also need to make sure that we are prioritizing policies that will prevent residents from being displaced from the housing they are already in. The City Council bears the responsibility of making sure there are affordable homeownership opportunities on the market to combat the housing demand that is outstripping the availability of homes and increasing the cost of homeownership. In Ward 11, I think that this is incredibly relevant when it comes to our senior population. In order to assure that our senior population has access to quality, affordable housing, we must expand opportunities for seniors to age in their homes and prevent seniors on fixed incomes from being priced out of their homes. But in general, I'd like to see all of our potential housing policies being weighed based on an outcome-driven approach, meaning that we would evaluate a proposed policy against how it helps achieve specific goals along the housing continuum. That way we can prioritize our limited resources and do the most good. Lastly, I also believe that we need to push the state and federal government to do their part. Our city is limited in what we can do, and the support of the state and federal government is key, and it's going to go a long way. Thank you.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
I think that as a candidate, I bring a different kind of experience to the table, experience working with our community. When it comes to practical skills or lived experience regarding the city's affordable housing needs, I think it's notable to mention that I'm a member of the Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity Leadership Council, where I partner with the community to take a hands-on approach to creating homeownership opportunities. But I also think that it's important to mention that I've been a member of the Minneapolis Public School Parent Legislative Committee, and in the past, I served on the Minneapolis Hale School Site Council. I was a board member of the 261 Fearless organization, a board member of the Waite Park Community Council, and the Waite Park School Site Council. I think this experience shows the perspective I will bring to City Hall. It shows that I will work for the community because I am part of the community. As I have connected with community members in Ward 11, I've heard over and over again that our community has felt left out of conversations. This comes up a lot when discussing the 2040 plan. I've had so many conversations about how the community did not feel seen and heard. I'm committed to listening, to learn, and to stay immersed in our community. I believe that our city council member must be committed to collaborating with all members of our community, with other officials, with organizations, and with experts. I am a connector and a strategic problem solver, and I will use these skills in collaboration to address our affordable housing needs. I firmly believe that no one person, no one city council member can single-handedly solve every challenge and address every issue that faces our city. Our best chance, our best path forward is one that brings all of us together. And I think that my practical skills and lived experience show that that's exactly what I will do. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here today.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
I appreciate you giving me the time here to explain my thoughts. Hi, Julie. I appreciate you giving me the time here to explain my thoughts and how I feel about the city. And as to your question, I feel that this isn't something that's this is going way back longer than 4 years. I feel that the policies that got us to this point have been in place for years, maybe even decades. And decades of having those bad policies or those bad leaders brought us here today. So I think this goes back longer than 4 years, even though that's good that our officials have been working on it the last 4 years. Yeah, like I said, I feel that this started way longer than 4 years ago. And I feel that it's going to take longer than 4 years to get us out of this situation. I feel that the only way that we can address these policies or issues that was put in place is to try our best to make it a level playing field. Try our best to make our housing policies more inclusive so that all those folks that's been excluded over the years can finally get a chance to enjoy living within the Minneapolis housing. I truly believe the city is headed in the right direction, but I strongly disagree. But I strongly believe that there is so much more work to do before we can comfortably say that our housing situation is getting better. I feel that we need to work to—
Time. Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Thank you for your second question. As an African American, I feel that the home ownership gap between Black and white, brown, and people of color is one of the largest gaps in the country. And I feel that there needs to be some sense of urgency behind fixing this gap. Yes, it's brought up time and time again within the city council. It's always number one on the questions of most organizations' question list, but there's little done about fixing the issue. My priorities would be to eliminate the racial home ownership gap. That's one of the biggest concerns that I have.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
Thank you for question number 3. I think that's the most important question that you've asked so far. Me being an African American living in Minneapolis, I will be the first to tell you that I have been a victim of racially influenced policies that was purposely put in place to keep me and my family and so many others and their families from thriving within the Minneapolis area. If I'm elected, I would recommend policies that make our housing market more accessible to every citizen in Minneapolis and not just the certain class of people. That's one of the biggest things that stands out to me. And that's one of the biggest things that I think we need to work on as council members of Minneapolis.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
So everyone deserves a safe, stable, and affordable place to live. I do believe the city is headed in the right direction, large part because of my leadership at City Council. When I was first elected, the city was doing some good work, but it was not focused on outcomes and not focused on eventually ending homelessness. During my time on council, I've worked to first build a plan to increase affordable housing on all income levels, and then I've passed numerous policies to get us there by addressing what makes a housing unaffordable: land costs, material costs, and labor costs. Additionally, people don't just need housing, they need to belong to a community. And because of that, I've also worked on including racial and environmental justice in my housing policies. With some of the worst racial disparities in housing in the nation, we all need to be doing more. To that end, I've led on changing our emergency shelter rules to house more people right now, while also I co-authored the inclusionary zoning ordinance to increase the amount of affordable housing in the long term. As the chair of the city's zoning and planning committee, I've worked to increase density along transit corridors, as well as hold developers accountable to providing the most they can for their future tenants and neighbors. Also made sure that tenants get notice and protections when their affordable housing is sold by authoring the advanced notice of sale ordinance. And finally, I've helped fund this growth by securing a record amount of money in the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The city still does a lot of one-off projects, but they're no longer siloed, and the city has a better idea where we are making progress toward ending homelessness and where we still need to do more work.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
The city needs to be much better at collaborating with housing advocacy organizations to implement solutions. The tenant opportunity to purchase ordinance that I'm working on right now is a great example of that. I've been working on that policy for a number of years now, and it's been very slow going. The city staff is very concerned that they will not have the staff to enforce the ordinance. City staff has also been working on a number of housing other policies, such as in my upcoming ordinance to legalize single room occupancy. And the lack of staff capacity is a real concern. However, myself and my co-authors have made compromises on the draft ordinance to limit the scope and the scope of the ordinance, and community advocates have offered their own expertise and resources. It's important to get the policy passed soon, especially because of how helpful it could be in creating new home ownership opportunities coming out of the out of the eviction moratorium. With these compromises and extra resources, there's a solution there if the city staff can work with myself and other housing advocates. City also needs to highlight our work better in order for housing innovators to see Minneapolis as a destination for their next project. Minneapolis is a leader by passing the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, the Transportation Action Plan, as well as their work around climate justice, like my Sustainable Building Policy Ordinance. Some examples of my innovation have been the Envision Project, where the city worked with the Hennepin County Medical Center, Street Voices for Change, and the Architecture School at the U to create ultra-affordable, ultra-sustainable housing for those who are currently homeless. We currently do not have the tools to create the housing we need, and the world needs to know how serious I am about breaking down the status quo and how we need to provide more housing in the city.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
As a longtime affordable housing advocate and attorney, I'd continue the work I've been doing in my first term. Housing is really complex, and we need policymakers who understand the issue, who have been working on the issue for a long time, that are listening to community and are passionate about creating solutions that will actually make change. This is not a simple job, and housing is very complex. That's something that, right before becoming elected, I was the policy director for the Minnesota Housing Partnership and worked as a member of the Make Homes Happen coalition, working on the state level to make sure that every community had affordable housing. These are the experiences that will allow me to continue to be an innovator and leader on housing at the city, especially at a time when we all need to be doing so much more.
All righty, so glad we got that working. Apologize again for the convoluted schedule we've developed here. We are going to return to the Q&A session, and we do have a question from an audience member, and I'm going to direct this to Albert as our first responder. The question is, how can policies be developed to deploy manufactured housing into the housing mix in Minneapolis? Albert?
Thank you for your question. I want to apologize to everybody that saw that video I made. I think it was the worst one that I've ever made. It was actually my first recording, so give me a break on that, you guys. They'll get better as I do more. I'll get better at it. I'm a fast learner. But first, I think that, it took generations of very bold and racist policies to get us to where we are today in Minneapolis with this terrible housing crisis we see today. You know, we got tent cities popping up throughout the neighborhood at just about every park, businesses, schools. We've even had to shut a school down because we got tent cities next to the school. I think we're just at a tipping point with the housing crisis that we see, and it's going to take very bold policies to get us out of this mess. You know, we put millions and millions and millions of dollars into our housing market to fix this, and we're worse now than we've ever been. And so we got to put the right people in office that's going to make the right decisions for our community. We got to basically enact policies, very, very bold policies, and make changes to what we got going on so we don't face this. You go on my website, www.albertross.org, and you'll see some of the policies that we want to put in place to help change this crisis that we face today.
All right, thank you, Albert. We will direct that question now to Jeremy. How can policies be developed to deploy manufactured housing into the housing mix in Minneapolis?
Oh, thanks, Chad. I think manufactured housing is one of the answers to how we can increase housing availability here in Minneapolis. And the way this is something I care a lot about and that I have been working on. Manufactured housing is used more in other parts of the country and other countries where the housing costs are higher. So the simple answer is we need to somehow reduce the costs for manufacturers of manufactured housing. When you look at the parts where this is much more used on the coast, where just the land costs alone make using manufactured housing more feasible. We have, used manufactured housing here in Minneapolis. I think there's some great projects. I like the Rose that was done. But it's something that the cost savings isn't enough. And that's been one of the challenges. So the way I've been looking at the incentives are, how can we find a way to really incentivize this type of housing, either by making creating a big enough economy of scale. Like if you're only going to save $5,000 on a development, you need a lot more developments to make that worth it for what this is. Because I think it's important to think about that this is a very dramatic change for how homes are built and how the traditionally this sector works. And so being able to address the cost would be a big thing. I think the other part of it is manufactured homes can be much more easily energy efficient. They're much more environmental because they use less materials. So being able, things such as a carbon tax would drive up the costs of housing enough to incentivize this type of housing as well.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. The question next goes to Kurt. How can policies be developed to deploy manufactured housing?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I think anybody who runs for or holds public office has to admit they're a generalist. If I'm a specialist in one thing, I may not be so smart in others. I don't claim to be a deep housing expert, but I'm very intrigued by any sort of technological advance that will help solve this kind of a problem, just as other things happen, LED and electricity, heat pumps and heating, these are very intriguing options. And you tell me what the barrier is and I'll weigh the costs and benefits. I do think it's a very intriguing and very important option moving forward. I understand that there is a facility, I can't name it, but in Minnesota, a factory that actually produces this stuff. So I think it's a very good option going forward. Don't claim to be an expert on the technology of manufactured housing, but I do think it's an excellent and intriguing possibility. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Kurt. Next up, the question goes to Dillon. How can we deploy manufactured housing?
Thanks, Chad. So it's a great question. I'll first share a personal experience. My grandparents actually, so a large portion of my childhood was spent in a manufactured home. And me personally, I would love to have a shipping container home. Not quite the full manufactured home, but certainly something we don't see all the time here in Minneapolis. But we often as a society, treat manufactured properties as less than, but I actually think it is a smart way to rapidly expand housing. And the council member had referenced, you know, when we look at the cost savings, right? I think that's critical to how we look at this big picture. I fully support more than traditional housing. I think we need to look at a number of different programs and types of housing to meet our needs, because the reality is, if we just build one solution to our housing challenges, it's just not going to fit the need of our community. Our community and our city is incredibly diverse, and so our housing policies should match that. And I'm completely invested in learning what type of housing solutions would work for the city of Minneapolis, not only in Ward 11, but across the city, because we can't just live in this silo of what works in Ward 11. We really need to look at what works around the city and what is going to get us out of the crisis that we're in. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dillon. Just a reminder to our audience members to please submit Q&A or questions. I guess you guys are submitting the questions through the Q&A so that we can present those to our candidates here. All right, the next question will be directed first to Jeremy. I have to rephrase this. What, I guess, have you done, or what do you want to continue to do as a city council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
I think a big thing is just to really make sure that we are committing record dollars to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I think the best way to do that is really to call out the myth that we actually do not have an official Affordable Housing Trust Fund. One of the last things I did in my former job as a policy director was pass a statewide law to make sure that more cities could form Affordable Housing Trust Fund. But one of the key factors, and one that we don't have in Minneapolis, is it needs to be a dedicated fund. And so that means every single year there's a dedicated amount of money toward housing. And it's something that, you know, there's been a lot of pushback within the city just to make sure that we have kind of the flexibility to use those dollars in another way. But I can't imagine a year where housing is not critical and where we need that funding. So that would be the first bit, would be to make sure that we are dedicating money toward housing every year, something that the housing advocates can count on every year as you're looking at things coming through the pipeline.
All right, thank you. Same question goes to Kurt this time. What will you do as council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
First of all, I have to begin with a more across the board kind of warning. As you know, the mayor has proposed a property tax increase this year that exceeds 5%. It's much larger than previous years. And not only that, but those same increases are projected to repeat themselves all the way through 2027. So when we're talking, it's the Dirksen thing, is you remember $1 billion here, $1 billion there, pretty soon you're talking about real money. On the other hand, housing is just so vital. And so I would look for ways that we can get the best bang for that buck. That Housing Affordable Trust Fund should be a real trust fund, I agree. And perhaps we can work it into a revolving trust fund. Perhaps we can begin then to get some return and reinvest that return in more housing. If we can figure out a way to collect some of that back, recycle it. It's going to be a really tough problem because we have a lot of fiscal demands coming up in the next year and the next 5 years. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Kurt. Dillon, what will you do as council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new and accessible housing stock?
Thank you for the question. So I think fundamentally it starts with looking at ensuring that our city's budget meets the needs and the demands of our community, right? It's also pushing if it doesn't, right? And working and building those partnerships with the mayor's office to make sure that it does meet the needs of our community. And it's working with community groups and organizations such as yours to make sure we hear directly from those most impacted. And it's encouraging individuals, developers, and the like to make investments in our city. And in order to do that, we have to get public safety right. We have to make sure our business community is supported, and we have to make sure that our arts and entertainment communities are also included in that. And it's creating policies, as I mentioned earlier, around preservation of affordable housing, production of affordable housing, and certainly protecting those that are living in those environments currently. And you mentioned accessibility, and I think that's critical. And that's why I support a multi-pronged approach to affordable housing, because we need to make sure it's accessible to everyone in our city, not just a renter, right? Creating pathways to home ownership, I'll say it until I'm blue in the face, is a critical piece to how we continue to advance this and generate wealth within our communities. Thank you for the question.
All right, thank you. Same question finally goes to Albert. What will you do as council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
Thank you for the question. You know, I'll go back and say the same thing I've been saying. It took us generations to get to where we are today. This didn't happen in 4 years. This didn't happen in 10 years. This went through lifetimes and generations to get here. This ain't gonna get changed in 4 years. You know, each election cycle, we get folks that come in and talk all the pretty words, and they might mention Black, brown, and people of color, or they might not. They might just say BIPOC, which, you know, most people don't even, it goes over most people's head. Each year each election cycle, they tell this wonderful story of how they're gonna make lives better for everyone. And they get in there, we elect these guys, and they do nothing. They might try and do something, or they might help the homeless shelter. No, we need bold people that's going to get in there and enact bold policies and make this a level playing field for everybody. And if I'm elected, I'm going to be that guy that's going to get in there and I'm going to be a bold leader, and I'm going to enact bold policies that's going to make this a playing level field for everybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And again, audience members, feel free to submit more questions through the Q&A. Next question is directed first to Kurt. Considering what you know about cost burden and vulnerable renters in the city, what will you do as city council member to improve the overall quality and accessibility of their housing options?
Well, first of all, we have to have a reasonable inspection regime that makes sure that housing is safe, that it meets minimal standards of habitability and hopefully nice amenities, but at the same time does not price housing out of the market. So we want to make sure that it's always worth reviewing both the effectiveness and also the over effectiveness, cost effectiveness of our regulatory policies. Again, I sounded like a broken record. Get people into their homes so that they have an investment. Get a landlord downstairs in a duplex or triplex who has the same stake in quality housing that we have, and then look at what we can put into it in the way of money, in addition to just putting people into affordable housing. Also, preserving it and improving it. As Mr. Schroeder pointed out, it's a very complex, multifaceted issue.
All right, thank you. Same question goes next to Dillon. Considering what you know about cost burdened and vulnerable renters in the city, what will you do as city council member to improve the overall quality and accessibility of their housing options?
Thanks for the question, Chad. So I think it starts, as you mentioned, around vulnerable tenants, right? So I myself previously lived in one of our city's most notoriously bad landlords' properties. And so I think it starts with making sure that the environments that our renters are experiencing are safe and they're well maintained, and that there aren't rodent and pest issues, and that the landlords are responsive to the tenants' needs. Beyond that, I think it's continuing to make investments to ensure that we are developing a wide array of affordable options for tenants around our city, but it's also sharing resources and making investment in resources for those who do fall on hard times, because it is a reality of life. I've been there personally myself in the past, and many members of our community have been. So making investments and also sharing the resources of current county, state, and federal programs that are available with tenants who may be experiencing you know, a vulnerable moment in their life. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dillon. Albert, the question goes to you. Considering what you know about cost burden and vulnerable renters in the city, what would you do to improve the overall quality and accessibility of their housing?
Thank you for your question. You know, I would definitely enact programs to help these folks out. You know, most of these people don't have good credit, you know, just because of the policies that have been put in place. You know, you got folks working 3, 4, and 5 jobs and still can't afford their rent, you know, and we need to come up with programs to help get these folks the money that they're working for, so folks, or to put people in a situation so they don't have to work 5 jobs and still get evicted. You know, right now, I'll say it again, our housing crisis is at the worst it's ever been in Minneapolis. And we've had some of the greatest leaders down in that office that you can imagine. And right now, today, we're at the worst position that we've ever been in. I've been in Minneapolis over 25 years. I've never seen tent cities. I've never heard that word tent city until just recently. Just a couple years ago, tent cities, they're popping up everywhere. So that tells me that all the millions and millions and millions or billions of dollars that we've thrown at it to allegedly say we're going to fix it, it's done nothing but went in 1 or 2 guys' pocket. And at the end of the day, people are still left out on the road. Even today, there's millions of people in this. There's I wouldn't say millions, but there's hundreds of thousands of people who's waiting to get their rent paid because the programs are doing such a terrible job at doing that. I would put bold policies in place that hold people accountable and that get people out of the mess that they're in or the situation that they're in. I would definitely serve all people and not just one group of people. And I would do everything that I can and work with the ward and the leaders of the council so we can make sure that we're serving all people, everybody in the community, and not just one group of people. It's going to take bold policies to get us out of this mess, folks. And Albert Ross is going to put those bold policies in place. Thank you.
I got unmute. I'm unmuted now.
You're good.
Thank you, Albert. Last up on that question is Jeremy. Considering what you know about cost burden and vulnerable renters, what would you do to improve quality and accessibility?
Sure. So what I've done here in the ward is really partner with the neighborhood organizations and as well as tenants themselves. You know, so for parts of our ward where we have some very at-risk families, making sure that their landlords are keeping up to code. I've worked with the city's fire as well as housing inspection to make sure that if you are renting in Ward 11, you have a safe and healthy place to live. And that's been a lot of kind of full-time work just to make sure that the landlords are there. But that said, I've also worked with the landlords to see what is going to make like that a more healthy environment, whether that is adding security cameras, which we've done in the Boston area, or just making sure that folks are getting out and getting to meet each other. One thing I would suggest kind of going forward that I think will have a big impact is really making sure we have a right to counsel, that every renter throughout the city would have an attorney going into housing court. Just the fact of a tenant having an attorney is guaranteed to get better outcomes, whether that is making sure that they're treated fairly in the court or just making sure that landlords are abiding the law as they are looking at eviction.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Moving on to our next question, kind of the hot topic of late, certainly in the last couple of weeks here. And we'll direct this first to Dillon. What is your position on the rent stabilization charter amendment that will be on this year's ballot, and your views on enacting a future rent stabilization policy within Minneapolis?
Thank you for the question, Chad. So in a previous forum, I kind of shared my view on this. I'll share it again. I think the idea of rent stabilization or rent control on the surface certainly has a lot of positive outcomes, right? As I shared, as a renter, for the majority of my time living in Minneapolis, I've experienced a multitude of different situations with different landlords and different properties and different areas that I've lived. I would say, me personally, from my lived experience, the component around rental increases, I think could certainly increase some landlords or encourage some landlords to increase rents that they might not currently increase just because it's allowed. And I certainly think there is a lot more work that we need to do. So I support rent stabilization as a broader idea. Specifically, I think we need to really hammer down what that would look like for the city of Minneapolis and how we truly make sure that it's equitable across the board. I think that's the key to rent stabilization or rent control as a whole. The idea is good, and if we look at other cities around the country, from what I've looked into, and again, similar to what Kurt said, I would not claim to be a housing expert, but from the research that I have done, it's kind of been hit or miss, and there's certainly been, nuances to the specific territory. So I do not, in its current proposal, support it. I do think it's something we need to look at as a city council and as a city, but in its current format, I do not support it.
Okay. Thank you much, Dillon. The question then next goes to Albert. Sorry, I was scrolling and lost track of where I am.
Don't
Here
worry.
we go.
You said Albert is good enough. You've done great. So keep up the good work. All right, I'll just take this one and run right with it, you guys.
All right.
I think this is another terrible decision for our city. I think it's a lazy decision. To me, it just opens the door for the city to take over other areas in the private sector. Next, they're going to go to McDonald's and say, hey, we think you should charge this much for a burger. I think the city should do their work and just make policies to protect renters, but they shouldn't have to take over the industry. And I mean, they're having a mess dealing with all the issues that they got down there now. Why take another industry and put it under your belt and turn it into another mess? I think it's a terrible decision for our city. And I think it'll just make our city that much more complicated. We got enough complications going on. Let's just think of policies that can protect people and make it easy for people to rent and not take over the industry and think that's a better way to fix it. So I won't be voting for it. And again, I think it's just, they're going to figure out if you give them access to take over this, next they'll be telling you how much a restaurant can charge for a burger, or how much me as a construction worker can charge a homeowner to patch up their wall or to fix their window. They're going to make me charge a certain price, even though I know my value is way more than that small price. So I think it's a terrible decision, and I wouldn't make that. If I'm elected, it won't happen under my watch, people. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Albert. Same question goes to Jeremy. Position on rent stabilization.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I wholeheartedly support the ballot initiative. And just to be really clear, this is not any policy that you've been hearing about. This just allows the city to start to look at any of these policies. It is just meeting the state law requirement that we have a vote to be able to look at any sort of policy. So for my position, I just want to share that I actually changed my position. You know, when I came into office, I was against it. I thought it was a little, that rent control, as I understood it, was too heavy-handed. But over 4 years of passing renter protections and working on other solutions, there is not a way to really control the rent. Any policy that we go through as a city and try to make things more stable for renters, under the current law, landlords can just pass that cost on to renters. And that's what made me change my mind. Like, there's nothing to stop the horrible situation of a landlord who raises rent above what the market would even think is reasonable, or has an even more of an exploitive business plan where they actually count on the person not being able to pay and then being evicted. It's a really small minority in Minneapolis, but it does happen, and it's tragic when you see this happen for a family that's very much at risk. We have no tools right now. Rent control is and while that is just one option, having some form of some policy is the only option to make sure that we're looking out for those families. I do think we will have to, this will be a whole conversation of what that actually looks like in Minneapolis, and we will need to talk about what's going to work here. We can learn from other cities. Other cities have been doing this for a long time, and I think there's a lot of things that we put in, and we also can. I'm committed to making sure that we're working with affordable housing landlords to make sure that we are protecting the worst of the worst, and we still have a program that gets people in the business of being an affordable housing landlord and works for the city.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Internet problems, but the question next goes to Kurt. What is your position on the rent stabilization charter amendment and views on enacting rent stabilization in the future?
Thank you. I support it. As Mr. Schroeder correctly pointed out, this is not a full-scale enactment of rent control. This is what I call hip pocket authority. It puts a tool in our toolbox that we can use if needed and as needed to stabilize rents. It's very different than what's going on right now in St. Paul, which is a full-fledged rent control ordinance being proposed by referendum, which I think is a bad way to do it. We're doing it the right way. We're giving the city council the hip pocket authority. We can then have a deliberative process, vet the proposals. If we need it, put forward the very best possible proposal, and then again, under state law, send it to the voters. And so I support giving the council that, what I call again, hip pocket authority. I also would recommend a very good book. Shane Phillips wrote a book called The Affordable City. It's recommended by Belinda Key, a MinPost writer. 3 S's in housing policy: stability, supply, and I'm going to do the thing and forget the third one. But stability, supply, and in any event, keeping the key elements together, and stability is a very important piece now. And that third one will come to me. I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm sure it will as soon as I start talking.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I think we will make this question our last question, and your 2 minutes can also will need to serve as your kind of closing statement. So we'll be done after this question. We're going to start with Dillon, and the question is, as a city council member, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time homebuyers?
Thanks for the question, Chad. So I think, as I had mentioned previously, it's really critical that we make investments into resources and programs that support this. When I decide to no longer be a renter, I will be a first-time home buyer. And to me, it's incredibly critical that there are resources and programs to help, educate me, right, on home ownership and the challenges and all that's included in that wonderful thing. And then also, support should there be obstacles. in the home buying experience. But a lot of that has to do with inventory, and it has to do with the multiple types of inventory that someone could purchase. So I think it's incredibly critical that we look at all communities and how we make those investments and that development beside apartment living. So, it goes back to many earlier points I made, and I'm not going to continue to make those, but, for me, a lot of my housing specific commitments and priorities are available on my website at dgmpls.com. And I would just encourage those to go there and learn more about where I stand on housing and the other important issues. And, I want to just say, since this is also my closing statement, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and answer some of your questions and to make homes happen. Thanks for the work that you're doing in our community to continue to expand affordable housing options throughout the city. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dillon. Next up will be Albert.
Awesome.
Last question is, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
Okay, I'll kind of go over some of the things that I've already went over before. I would support the work of the Community Land Trust to put more land into the hands of the community for resident-led planning. I would do a much better job tracking housing complaints, housing discrimination practices, and problem properties. I would expand tools like financial coaching for first-time home buyers. I would work with local banks to offer better down payment assistance programs for minorities and people of color. I would fund programs to prevent housing loss, support elder renters with tenant protection and access to legal aid, and assist seniors who wish to downsize. Establish a workforce housing voucher to support those who do not qualify for current programs. I would strengthen our current housing laws to prohibit discrimination against potential tenants with history in housing court. And you go to my website, Albert Ross, www.albertross.org, and you'll be able to see some of the other policies that we plan on using. And if you got ideas that you want to bring to our team, we're always open to ideas because we know we can't do this alone. It's going to take the entire ward to care for this ward, and we're opening the door so the ward can come in and we can run this city together. And secondly, I'll just do my closing. We've tried the folks from the well-to-do family. We've already tried the rich folks. It's gotten us nowhere. We're worse today than we've ever been. We've tried the lawyers. We've gotten nowhere. We're worse today than we've ever been. It's going to take bold thinking and bold action to get us out of this mess. It's time for something different. It's time for a change. So we need you to choose the best leader to lead us out of this mess. With your support, we can do this, Ward 11. Won't you go to my website again, www.albertross.org, and lead us out of this? What do you have to lose? We got 2 years. What do you have to lose? Let us prove to you that we can get us out of this mess. 2 years. Let us prove it to you. Thank you for your time. And if you got any questions, go on our website, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Albert. Jeremy, you're up.
Sure, thanks, Chad, and thanks to the Make Homes Happen Coalition for this forum tonight. I really appreciate the format. I think the longer time really helped us all kind of get into the details for something as important as creating homes for everybody. For your question on what to do for really looking out for renters, and I think there's a couple things. I'll get into things I've mentioned before, but I think it's also important to talk about like how we get access to credit, and as well as making sure that folks are able to stay in their home. And I think one project I'm currently working on that I've mentioned before is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. Like how we are able to get folks that are currently renting and able into owning their own home. This is especially going to be a big program that will help our Black, Indigenous, and people of color become homeowners, especially in parts of the city that we were starting to move the right way, but unfortunately have gone the wrong way, and need to make sure that we have very specific programs that are going to address the home ownership disparity and make sure that they have all of the tools to make sure we can start to correct that. I think that one of the things, just to kind of talk about my closing, like that I'm really proud of, and one of the things I moved here is Ward 11 is one of the most affordable parts of the city, or used to be. It is something that is changing very fast. And as this city as a whole becomes more and more affordable, we need to be looking to cities that are too far gone, that are no longer affordable, to make sure that we can stay in the city, that the people that have given their entire lives and dedication to the community can stay here. And that takes work. It is something that we need to make sure that we have places for, as people are growing their family, they're able to make sure they have places for either their aging parents or their aging kids. We need to make sure that we continue to produce more affordable housing. We do not see a new starter homes being built in Minneapolis, and we need to make sure that we have options, not just for where those.
I'm sorry to do that, Jeremy, but I do have to cut you off. You let me do it one more time. All right, final question goes to Kurt. As a city council member, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time homebuyers? And your closing statement, please.
Well, first of all, I'm going to make political history. I'm the first candidate ever to begin his closing statement with the word duh. The third S is subsidy, stability, subsidy, and supply. And we've been talking about subsidy. I would like to see us actually do what we do with refugees. And I hate to even characterize my neighbors in other parts of the city. But when people to get people to cross the color line, we need, as a largely white ward, to say, come on, we're waiting for you. You came across, we've welcomed people from across the oceans. Now we want to welcome people from across the freeway. Let's find the people that we can specifically and legally assist because their relatives were excluded, and let's welcome them. I think the people in Ward 11 would be very happy to begin a sponsorship program saying, look, we want a certain number of people of color on every block in this city. We want to break down the social barriers that have excluded them all this time. And it's a very nebulous kind of a thing. There's something called the Singapore solution. In order to prevent tension between Chinese and Malays in Singapore, the government just said, look, every apartment building and block is going to have a certain number of each of you. We can't do that here, but we can identify people that have been excluded and get them included. Again, I want to just thank you for asking some very challenging questions. You caught me once at least here, and look forward to the conversation with my colleagues. As always, this has been a great conversation among the members of the candidate panel, and thank them and thank the organizations that sponsored this.
All right. Yes. Thank you, gentlemen. Jeremy Schroeder, Kurt Anderson, Dillon Gherna, Albert Ross. Appreciate you guys taking the time, diving into this such a pressing topic of conversation for us in the city of Minneapolis. Members of the audience, we appreciate you joining us and taking the time to submit questions. Get out there and vote. Have a good night, everybody.